Joy Behar shot up from her chair so suddenly that it scraped loudly against the studio floor. Her face flushed a deep crimson, the kind that comes not just from anger, but from wounded pride. Her voice shook as she pointed across the table, no longer trying to mask her fury. "How dare you call me small?" she snapped. "I've been doing this job for years. Years. I've interviewed presidents, celebrities, world leaders, people who actually matter." For a brief moment, the studio felt like it was holding its breath. Cameras remained trained on the table, lights blazing, audience frozen. Clint Eastwood didn't raise his voice, he didn't even look rattled. He simply leaned back slightly, eyes narrowed in that familiar, unmistakable way, and asked calmly, "And how many of them left here feeling like they'd been treated with respect?" The question landed harder than a shouted insult. Joy opened her mouth, then closed it, visibly scrambling for words. Eastwood pressed on, his tone steady but firm. How many walked away thinking that was a professional interview? Joy began sputtering now, her practiced composure unraveling on live television. "I don't have to take this from you," she snapped. "From you or anyone else." "You're absolutely right," Eastwood replied evenly. "You don't have to take anything from me. Just like I don't have to sit here and let you turn what should have been a conversation about art into your personal political theater." The tension had grown so thick it felt physical. Whoopi Goldberg finally leaned forward, trying to regain control of the moment. "Clint, Joy, maybe we should all take a breath here." "No, Whoopi," Eastwood said as he slowly rose from his chair. His movement was unhurried, deliberate, and instantly commanded the room. "I think Joy and I understand each other perfectly now." Joy was practically vibrating with anger, her hands clenched into fists on the table. "You can't just walk out of an interview because you don't like the questions," she shot back. "Watch me," Eastwood replied, his mouth tightening into that iconic squint audiences had seen for decades. "I came here as a courtesy. I came to talk about something I care about. I didn't come here to be your punching bag for the day. This is live television." Joy protested, desperation creeping into her voice. "You can't just leave, can't I?" Eastwood asked, already reaching up to remove his microphone. He paused, then looked directly at Joy. "See, that's another thing you don't understand. Real power isn't about cornering someone on live television. Real power is knowing when to walk away." Joy leaned forward, sensing control slipping through her fingers. "If you leave now, you'll look like you can't handle tough questions," she said, almost pleading. Eastwood stopped and turned toward the main camera instead. The audience at home suddenly became his focus. "Folks watching at home," he said calmly, "I came here to talk about a film that means something to me. Instead, I got ambushed by someone more interested in viral clips than actual conversation. That tells you everything you need to know about the state of television today." He turned back to Joy, his expression unreadable but resolute. "As for handling tough questions, lady, I've been handling tough questions since before you knew what a microphone was. The difference is, they were usually asked by professionals." Joy's face darkened further, now bordering on purple with rage. "You arrogant has-been," she spat. "You think you can just insult me on my own show?" The words hung in the air like a slap. The studio audience was completely silent. No gasps, no applause, nothing. The other hosts stared at the table, visibly mortified. Even crew members behind the cameras froze, eyes wide, unsure if they were witnessing television history or a total collapse. Eastwood slowly turned back to face Joy. For a moment, he looked exactly like the characters he'd played in dozens of westerns. Calm, dangerous, and absolutely done. "Has been," he repeated quietly, tasting the words. "That's interesting," he continued, his voice low but cutting, coming from someone whose biggest claim to fame is sitting at a table talking about other people's accomplishments. The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop as everyone processed what had just happened. Joy sat frozen, stunned by the precision of the blow. Eastwood's expression didn't change, but somehow the air around him seemed heavier, charged with finality. Without another word, he turned and walked off the set, leaving behind a table of shaken hosts, a stunned audience, and a moment of live television no one would forget. Eastwood repeated the words slowly, deliberately, as though he were turning them over on his tongue, testing their weight and bitterness. He leaned back slightly in his chair, his eyes never leaving Joy's face. There was no anger in his expression, no raised voice, no clenched fists, but somehow that calm made the moment far more unsettling. "You know, Joy," he continued, his voice measured and steady, "in all my years in this business, I've been called a lot of things, washed up, outdated, too old, too blunt, but you know who usually says those things." He paused just long enough for the silence to sting. "People who have actually accomplished something themselves." A ripple of discomfort passed across the table. Joy felt it immediately. For the first time since the segment began, doubt crept into her chest. She realized, too late, that she had crossed a line. The words had slipped out in a moment of arrogance, sharpened by habit and the comfort of a familiar battlefield. She knew she should pull back now. Apologize, deflect, move on, but pride wouldn't let her. "I've accomplished plenty." Joy shot back, lifting her chin. "Thank you very much." Eastwood didn't respond right away. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, resting his hands together as if considering her statement with genuine interest. Then he looked up, his voice dropping into a quiet register that somehow carried more menace than shouting ever could. "Have you?" he asked. The question landed like a hammer. "Let's see," he went on, ticking off invisible points with quiet precision. "You've managed to insult how many guests over the years, created how many manufactured controversies, destroyed how many interviews that could have been meaningful conversations instead of televised ambushes." Joy opened her mouth to interrupt, but he didn't stop. "How many people walked onto this set expecting a discussion and walked away feeling humiliated, dismissed, or turned into a punchline? I asked the questions that need to be asked." Joy replied, but her voice wavered now, betraying the confidence she was trying so hard to project. "No," Eastwood corrected her gently, though the word hit harder than any insult. "You ask the questions that get you attention. There's a difference between journalism and performance art, and somewhere along the way, you seem to have forgotten which one you're supposed to be doing." The tension at the table had become almost unbearable. No one spoke, no one moved. Cameras continued to roll, capturing every flicker of discomfort, every tightening jaw, every darting glance. Whoopi shifted in her seat, clearly aware that the situation was spiraling out of control. She forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and raised her hands slightly in a peacekeeping gesture. "Clint, maybe we can start over," she said carefully. "Joy, why don't you apologize, and we can get back to discussing the film." Joy snapped her head toward Whoopi, disbelief flashing across her face. "Apologize for what?" she demanded. "For doing my job." "Your job," Eastwood interjected calmly, turning back to her, "is supposed to be entertaining and informing your audience, not attacking your guests for sport." "I wasn't attacking you," Joy protested, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Eastwood laughed then, briefly, sharply, and it was not a pleasant sound. There was no humor in it, only weariness and something colder beneath. "Lady," he said, his voice firm now, "I've been in actual combat. I know what an attack looks like. The difference is, when someone attacked me in the service, at least they had the courage to do it directly, in the open, instead of hiding behind a television show format and an applause sign." The studio seemed to shrink around them. The other hosts were no longer pretending neutrality. They stared at Joy openly now, their expressions ranging from deep embarrassment to outright discomfort. One of them avoided eye contact altogether, suddenly fascinated by the papers on the table. Sarah looked like she wanted to crawl under it. Even the crew behind the camera stood frozen, fully aware they were witnessing something that could not be edited away. Joy felt the room turning against her, the familiar sense of control slipping through her fingers. For years she had dominated conversations, redirected narratives, and wielded sarcasm like a weapon. But now, faced with someone who refused to play along, the armor she relied on felt thin, fragile. Eastwood sat back again, not triumphant, not smug, just resolute. "You don't need to like me," he said evenly, "and I don't need your approval, but respect, real respect, comes from knowing when to listen instead of perform. And today, you chose performance." Silence followed. Heavy, final, the cameras kept rolling, and for the first time in a very long career built on confrontation, Joy had nothing left to say. Joy's voice cracked just slightly, but the defiance in her eyes burned hotter than ever. "Well, let me tell you something, Mr. Eastwood," she said sharply. "This is my house. These are my rules. And if you don't like my questions, you can leave." For a split second, the studio froze. Then Eastwood smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't polite or amused. It was cold. So cold that several people in the audience felt a chill run straight through them. It was the kind of smile that came not from humor, but from absolute clarity. "Your house, your rules," he repeated slowly. "You know what, Joy, you're absolutely right." He rose fully from his chair now, standing tall over the seated panel. "This is your house, and that's exactly the problem." Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Eastwood continued, his voice steady and deliberate. "In your house, guests get ambushed. In your house, disagreement is treated as disrespect. In your house, creating drama is more important than creating understanding." He gestured lightly around the set. "So congratulations, you've built yourself quite a house." Joy was sputtering now, her anger colliding with disbelief. "If you think you can just waltz in here and lecture me about television," she snapped, "you've got another thing coming. I'm not lecturing you about television." Eastwood replied calmly, "I'm pointing out that what you do isn't television. It's a circus. And you're the head clown." An audible gasp rippled through the audience. Even by daytime television standards, this was unprecedented. Several audience members instinctively covered their mouths. The other hosts stiffened in their seats. "How dare you?" Joy shrieked, completely abandoning any remaining professionalism. "How dare you come on my show and insult me like this?" "Your show?" Eastwood asked, glancing around the table. "Funny, I thought this was supposed to be a panel show with multiple hosts. Turns out it's just the Joy Behar Ego Hour, with some backup singers." Whoopi Goldberg finally leaned forward, her tone firm. "Clint, that's enough. Joy, you need to calm down right now." But Joy was far beyond calming down. "Don't tell me to calm down, Whoopi," she snapped. "This man comes in here with his holier than thou attitude and thinks he can disrespect me on national television." "The only person who's shown disrespect here," Eastwood said quietly, "is you. From the moment I sat down, you've been looking for a fight instead of a conversation. I was doing my job." Joy insisted, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "No," Eastwood said, shaking his head slowly. "Your job would be asking me about my work, my process, maybe even my opinions on film." He gestured toward the cameras. "Your job would be making your audience feel like they learned something or were entertained by something worthwhile." He paused, letting the words sink in. Instead, he continued, "You've spent the last 20 minutes trying to embarrass a guest who came here in good faith, and in doing so, you've embarrassed yourself and your show." Joy looked around the table desperately, searching for backup. She found none. The other hosts avoided her eyes. The audience was clearly siding with Eastwood. Even crew members behind the cameras were shaking their heads. "Fine," she said at last, her voice cracking. "If you don't want to answer real questions, then maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews." Eastwood was already removing his microphone, but he stopped at those words. "Real questions?" he asked, turning back. "You want to know what a real question sounds like, Joy?" He faced the main camera once again. "A real question would be, what drives you to keep making films at your age? A real question would be, what advice would you give to young filmmakers? A real question would be, what story are you most proud of telling?" He turned back to Joy. "But those questions require you to actually care about the answers, and we both know you don't." The studio was so quiet you could hear the camera operators breathing. Joy looked like she wanted to respond, but for once in her career, words failed her. "You know what the saddest part of all this is?" Eastwood continued, his voice softer now. "You had a chance to have a real conversation with someone who's lived through decades of American cinema history." He finished removing his microphone and placed it carefully on the table. "Instead, you chose to play gotcha games like an amateur blogger chasing clicks. That's not just a waste of your time and mine. It's a waste of your audience's time." He looked toward the crowd. "They deserve better than the performance you've been putting on." Joy finally found her voice again, but it came out as a screech. "Don't you dare lecture me about what my audience deserves. I've been connecting with viewers for decades." "Have you?" Eastwood asked as he straightened his jacket. "Or have you just been yelling at them for decades? Because there's a difference between connecting with people and just making noise." Behind the cameras, producers were frantically signaling, desperately trying to cut to commercial. But the damage was already done. Without another glance back, Clint Eastwood turned and walked off the set, leaving behind stunned hosts, a shaken studio, and a moment of television that would echo far beyond that stage. This was live television, raw, unfiltered, and unforgiving. There were no commercial breaks to hide behind, no edits to soften the damage. And now their biggest guest of the season was standing up, preparing to walk out after having completely dismantled one of the show's most prominent hosts in front of millions of viewers. Security, Joy called out suddenly, her voice sharp and desperate. The word echoed awkwardly through the studio, drawing gasps from the audience. Get security. For a brief moment no one moved. Then Clint Eastwood laughed, and for the first time since the interview began, it was a genuine laugh. Not bitter, not sarcastic, just incredulous. Security? He repeated, shaking his head slightly. What exactly are they going to do, Joy? Arrest me for hurting your feelings? The audience murmured. Even a few scattered laughs slipped out before quickly dying under the weight of the moment. Eastwood turned slowly, scanning the studio one last time. His eyes passed over the cameras, the stunned audience members frozen in their seats, the producers frantically whispering in headsets, and finally the panel of hosts who now looked as though they wished they were anywhere else on Earth. You know, he said calmly, I've been in this business for over 60 years. I've worked with the greatest directors this industry has ever produced. I've shared sets with some of the finest actors to ever step in front of a camera. I've been surrounded by the most professional crews in the world, people who respected their craft and the people they worked with. He paused, letting the silence stretch, and in all that time, he continued, I've never encountered anyone quite like you. Joy crossed her arms, forcing a smirk that didn't fool anyone. Is that supposed to be a compliment? She asked sarcastically, clinging desperately to her trademark bravado, trying to claw back some sense of control. Take it however you want. Eastwood replied evenly. But just remember this, when people talk about this interview tomorrow, they won't be talking about your tough questions. They won't be praising your journalistic integrity. He leaned in just slightly, his voice firm and unmistakably final. They'll be talking about how you completely lost your composure and embarrassed yourself on live television. The words landed like a closing argument. Joy opened her mouth, but nothing came out. For once, there was no clever retort, no sharp comeback. Just a tight jaw and burning cheeks. With that devastating final blow delivered, Clint Eastwood straightened his jacket and calmly turned away from the table. There was no dramatic flourish, no raised voice, no need for theatrics. He simply walked, slowly, deliberately, toward the studio exit. The audience erupted, some in stunned applause, others in shocked silence. The panel sat frozen. Whoopi stared straight ahead, lips pressed together. Sarah avoided looking at Joy altogether, her face pale. No one dared say a word. As Eastwood reached the doors, he paused briefly, not to look back, but simply to let the moment settle. Then he exited the studio without another word. The doors closed behind him. The cameras, still rolling, cut back to the panel. Joy's face was flushed red with a volatile mix of rage, humiliation, and disbelief. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried, and failed, to maintain composure. For years she had controlled the room. Today, the room had turned on her. The other hosts sat in stunned silence, fully aware they had just witnessed television history, but not the kind anyone hopes to be remembered for. Backstage, producers scrambled. Phones were already buzzing. Social media was exploding in real time. Clips were being uploaded before the segment even ended. There would be headlines within minutes. What had begun as a routine, promotional interview had spiraled into one of the most explosive confrontations in daytime television history. And Clint Eastwood, well into his 90s, had proven something undeniable. He was still the fastest draw in Hollywood, except this time his weapon wasn't a gun, it was words. So there you have it, folks, a reminder that experience, restraint, and quiet confidence can still overpower volume and spectacle. And now the question remains, do you think Joy Behar finally met her match? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one. If you think you can just waltz in here and lecture me about television, Joy snapped, her voice sharp and trembling with fury. Then you've got another thing coming. Eastwood didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice or rush to defend himself. Instead, he looked at her calmly, almost patiently, as though he had already accepted that this moment was inevitable. "I'm not lecturing you about television," he said evenly. "I'm pointing out that what you do isn't television. It's a circus, and you're the head clown." The reaction was immediate. A loud collective gasp rippled through the studio audience, unmistakable even by daytime television standards. Several people instinctively leaned forward in their seats. Others froze, mouths slightly open, unsure whether they had just heard what they thought they heard. This wasn't scripted banter. This wasn't playful tension. This was raw, unscripted confrontation. "How dare you?" Joy shrieked, her composure completely gone now. "How dare you come on my show and insult me like this?" Eastwood raised an eyebrow slightly, as if genuinely puzzled. "Your show?" he repeated. He slowly turned his head and glanced at the other hosts seated at the table. "That's funny. I thought this was supposed to be a panel show. Multiple voices, multiple perspectives." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Turns out it's just the Joy Behar Ego Hour, with some backup singers." The words hit harder than anything that had come before. The audience murmured softly, the sound buzzing through the studio like static. The other hosts shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, suddenly very aware that they were part of the moment whether they wanted to be or not. Whoopi Goldberg finally leaned forward, her expression firm but controlled. "Clint, that's enough," she said. Then she turned to Joy. "Joy, you need to calm down right now." But Joy was far beyond calm. She whipped her head toward Whoopi, eyes blazing. "Don't tell me to calm down," she snapped. "This man comes in here, looks down on me, and thinks he can disrespect me on national television." Eastwood folded his hands slowly on the table, his movements deliberate. "No," he said quietly. "What I did was respond to disrespect. There's a difference." Joy laughed sharply, a sound more bitter than amused. "Oh, please, you sit there acting superior, like you're above all this." "I'm not above it," Eastwood replied. "I'm just not interested in playing along." The studio lights seemed harsher now, the atmosphere tighter. Producers could be seen moving anxiously behind the cameras, whispering into headsets. This was spiraling fast, and everyone knew it. "You don't get to decide what television is," Joy shot back. "I've been doing this for decades. And that," Eastwood said calmly, "is exactly the problem. Doing something for a long time doesn't automatically mean you're doing it well. It just means no one stopped you." Another audible reaction rippled through the audience. Some people nodded. Others looked shocked. A few glanced nervously toward the exits, as if expecting security to step in. Joy slammed her hand on the table. "This is unbelievable. You think your success gives you the right to come in here and talk down to me. I think respect gives me that right," Eastwood replied, "and respect goes both ways." Whoopi raised her hands slightly, trying once more to regain control. "Okay, that's it. We're crossing lines here." "No," Joy interrupted, refusing to back down. "Let him talk. Let America see who he really is." Eastwood nodded once. "Fair enough." He leaned back slightly and looked out toward the audience. "What you're seeing here isn't strength," he said. "It's insecurity dressed up as outrage. It's noise mistaken for substance." Joy scoffed, but the confidence in her voice was starting to crack. "You don't know anything about my audience." "I know they deserve better," Eastwood replied. The table went silent again. Even Whoopi didn't speak this time. Eastwood stood slowly, his chair scraping softly against the floor. The sound echoed louder than expected in the quiet studio. "I came here expecting a conversation," he said. "Instead, I walked into an ambush." Joy stared up at him, seething. "Then leave," she said coldly. "If you can't handle it, leave." Eastwood gave a small nod. "That might be the first honest thing you've said all day." He glanced once more at the other hosts, then at the audience. "You all deserved a better discussion than this." As he stepped away from the table, the weight of the moment settled heavily over the studio. This wasn't just another heated exchange. It was a line crossed, a mask torn away, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful statement isn't made by shouting, but by refusing to participate in the spectacle at all.